If all the characters had that same level of depth into their characters and personalities with their supports, Fates could have the best roster of characters in the entire...
Well, I went easy on Fates a year ago. Granted, it probably would have helped if I played Birthright and Conquest all the way through before making the video instead of trying to upload it the same day Fates came out for that 1 year anniversary. Which didn't happen anyway. So last time I hinted I'd talk about Fate's structure and talk about how they could have combined all 3 games into a single and more focused story. But in terms of writing, Fates doesn't really offer much. So basically I'm pretty much going to make a similar video to the first one. Woo. So, Fire Emblem Fates, a game that tried to be something really big, but then fell flat on its face. The most notable thing about Fates is the fact that you have to buy the game 3 times if you want the full experience. Plus the 2 season passes if you want the rest of the story content. The whole gimmick of Fates was to choose a path you want to walk down, with the first few chapters giving you an idea of who you want to side with. It all sounds really nice and all, but the problem was that you're forced to buy whatever path you want to go down. Of course, part of it was to give different experiences to suit different players with different tastes. Birthright for those that want something more like Awakening, Conquest for those longtime fans, and then Revelations for the conclusion. This is good in concept, but how about the execution? I feel like I covered my issues with Revelations maps well enough in the last video, so I'll be focusing on the maps within Birthright and Conquest. Last time I've complimented the map design in Conquest for having maps built around the units you would have at that point, and with just a few units to work with, it's fine, but as the game progresses on and the game gets harder, it becomes a problem. Part of the fun of a Fire Emblem game is coming up with different strategies with each playthrough, and adjusting how you go through a map to prevent any deaths. The maps in Conquest are what I could best describe as puzzles. Honestly, the real difficulty of these maps is just figuring out the puzzle. And luck. And it's mostly luck, since most of my resets are a result of missing a vital hit, not to mention how some of the later maps can get a little cheap. Because of how little options there are in terms of clearing a map without losing units, luck pretty much becomes the only factor when going through a map. I remember Chapter 25 giving me problems when I was first going through it, only to save over the file by mistake on the semi-final chapter. Going through that difficult map again, I went through it on my first try with no problems. While I don't like how Conquest is designed, I wouldn't say it's bad overall. The maps in Conquest are simply designed in a different way, and while not all of them are very good, I can see why somebody would enjoy the maps in Conquest. Even though Conquest wasn't my cup of tea, it really isn't terrible. But with that said, let's talk about the maps in Birthright. Now, Birthright just might be the worst Fire Emblem game I've ever played. Now, Revelations might have been the more painful game to sit through, but the maps in Birthright are just inexcusable. I know I brushed on this a little, but Birthright tends to throw a bunch of enemies at the player at once, being overwhelmed as a way to create artificial difficulty. Because of this, I end up using Ryoma to clear out swarms of enemies, taking away EXP that could have gone to my other units. There's also this map that forces you to use Dragon Veins to even progress, let alone the map makes you choose between 2 Dragon Veins with no difference between the two, and picking the wrong one just results in harm inflicted onto your team. I just paired Ryoma with a flying unit and just flew over that mess. And how could I not forget Chapter 23, where you're constantly being struck by fire bombs, which also breaks a wall that doesn't look breakable, near the start with horse units hiding behind it, all for that possible cheap death on one of your squishier units that might be in range. So when it comes to the maps and fates, Birthright is just terrible, Revelations is painful, and Conquest works I guess. But there is one thing I've yet to talk about, which of course would be the story. Spoiler warning I guess? The story of Fates, it's pretty much agreed upon that the story's kind of crap. Because of that, I'm not going to go into too much detail over it. Out of the 3, the writing in Birthright is the best within the Fates trilogy. When it comes to the main story of Birthright, it's kind of underwhelming, but it ends up working in Birthright's favor, since that means there's less to screw up. That's not to say it's flawless, because there's still some parts in the story that are pretty flawed. But nowhere as flawed as Conquest or Rev. The writing in Birthright also has the edge by having the one thing the other routes don't have. World building. After playing Conquest, Rev, and even Awakening, it's nice to have a Fire Emblem game that actually puts world building into the story. I mean, it's not like the other Fire Emblem games had that sort of thing. Now, if Conquest is a bit of a mess. Basically, the Corrin chooses to see why Gan tried to kill them, with Garen wanting to straight up kill Corrin for coming back. Father of the Year right there. So after consulting the Ceiling Gods, Corrin is sent out to do missions to pad out the game's runtime. The plot doesn't really start until one point where Corrin watches Azura walk into a lake and proceeds to follow her, only to find a portal to another place, only for Azura to bring Corrin out of the new location and talk about the new location, only to say the place is cursed and saying the name outside the place will cause bad things to happen. Then Azura takes an orb that shows the true form of Garen, claims that it'll work for Leo and the sort, only for the orb to break. That happens. And then starts the conquest, only to overthrow Garen at the end. In Revelations, Corrin decides the side of no one, gets beaten into a pulp, and then proceeds to jump off a cliff. Oh, and Corrin wakes up in another world, place, kingdom, place, thing. Azura tells Corrin that the war was caused by something within Angel Island, so Corrin decides to have everyone join him, but he can't say the kingdom's name or you'll disappear or something. So Corrin spends half the game trying to ask everyone to join him, and they do so without question. And then they all jump off a cliff, and with only one death, so that's impressive. Also, there's this kid. He's god-awful. And there's also a random side character that randomly starts showing up in the plot, with Corrin and his team suspecting there's a traitor among them. Oh boy, I wonder who the traitor is. And that's pretty much the abridged version of all 3 routes. A big factor could have been writing stories for all 3 routes, but I doubt that was the problem, seeing how the original writer of Fates wrote 500 pages worth of story for Conquest and Birthright, with Conquest being filler for like 1/3 of the game. Not to mention they hired a different writer for Revelations, whose most known work being some game called Senrai Kagura. Because of that, it kind of makes the original point of the video pointless, since the idea was to put stories together, possibly playing as 3 different armies serving as different perspectives, in hopes that it would create a more focused story. Since there was a bit of a focus when it came to the game's writing, merging the games into one really wouldn't solve anything. It's even possible that some changes were made from the 500 pages of story, seeing how Hinoka originally didn't exist. Kinda going back to my thoughts on Fates, I also wasn't a fan of the music. Most of it was kinda bland and forgettable, with a few tracks really standing out, although a majority of them was just being lost in thought, since it's used so often throughout the game, causing the song to get old after a while. Really, this is probably an issue that I just seem to have since it's universally agreed on that Fates has a really good soundtrack.
I also really like the soundtrack of this game. It's not on the same level as Radiant Dawn, but it still has one of the better track lists from any Fire Emblem game.
So maybe it's just me not being a fan of the music. Really, I think that's all it really comes down to at Fates. With how I view it, Fates really isn't a good game, but still a really beloved game by many. While one could just either write it off as being terrible or a marvel of a Fire Emblem game, it could simply be a game that has a lot of flaws while having a lot of good things about it. What could really define whether or not Fates is bad will come to if the flaws ruin the enjoyment, or if the enjoyment is enough to overcome the flaws present in Fates. Of course, the flaws shouldn't simply go unaccounted for, since nothing could ever improve when any problems are just swept under the rug. I mean, they did improve some problems with Awakening, so who's to say that the next Fire Emblem game wouldn't improve on Fates?